Hello, I'm Tom Davies. I will be the host and narrator of this 14-part series entitled Collecting Stories, American Art. We'll be looking at works from a private collection acquired over a period of more than 50 years. You will see 240 paintings by 175 different artists. Each presentation is organized around a specific theme. The works spanned a period of 1850 to the present day. We think this is a unique and engaging way to look at the breadth and scope of American art, and we hope you enjoy it. The first truly American school of art centered around the Northeast and got its name, the Hudson River School, from the early artists traveling up this majestic river in search of unspoiled American landscape. Inspired in 1825 by the artist Thomas Cole, scores of gifted artists followed soon thereafter. Among the most acclaimed was Sanford Gifford, my friend right here next to me, who painted this iconic image of Cotterskill Clove in the Catskills. Gifford became one of the most important and respected artists of this group of painters. A larger version of this exact scene is hanging in the Metropolitan Museum American Wing. Gifford's skill took the naturalistic approach to landscape painting to a whole new level. By using a delicate technique of applying multiple layers of glazes over the painted canvas, he achieved a more sophisticated approach called luminism, producing a glow or a haze enveloping the image. Gifford was so highly regarded that upon his untimely death in his early 50s, the Metropolitan Museum honored him with its first retrospective of an American artist. What I've found to be somewhat unsettling is that during this period of magnificent images of the American landscape, the Civil War was raging, resulting in an estimated 650,000 deaths, the costliest conflict in American history. Many of the artists were caught up in this conflict, including Sanford Gifford, seen here in the mid-1860s. The Hudson River School was, in every sense, a romantic movement, depicting this new country as another Eden with limitless possibilities through a sublime, passionate, and dramatic portrayal of the land. John Frederick Kensett is considered among the most important Hudson River School artists of the mid-19th century. Through his skill and force of personality, he exerted a major influence in the art world of his day. His presence and role cannot be overemphasized. Born in Cheshire, Connecticut, his English immigrant father owned an engraving firm in New Haven, where, as a young man, he developed an engraver's sharp eye for detail and a sensitivity for atmospheric effects. This image of the Bashbish Falls in South Egremont, Mass., a favorite subject of the artist's, research indicated he did about 5 paintings of the falls between 1852 and 1860, most of which are in museums today. Among his many accomplishments, Kensett was active in the founding of the Met, served as a trustee throughout his career. His gregarious personality, willingness to help other artists, resulted in his studio becoming a magnet for other painters. His tragic death, trying to save the life of another artist's drowning wife along Darien's coast, reflects his extraordinary, unselfish nature. As one critic put it, Kensett had a gift for friendship. This scene of the Hudson is considered by many scholars as the quintessential Hudson River image. It was painted by Jasper Cropsey, looking towards Storm King Mountain. At 60 by 108 inches, it is a monumental size. All the more remarkable, it was painted totally from memory in Cropsey's studio in London. The English viewers were stunned by its brilliant colors, but also skeptical about its accuracy. Cropsey displayed American leaves in full autumn colors as support for its botanical likeness. The Hudson River artists wished to separate themselves from European influences. They believed to paint nature, you must be in nature, and they sketched and often painted outdoors. Its popularity lasted from the mid-1820s until roughly the late 1890s. Previous to this, landscape art was considered inferior to figure, historical, and religious subjects, but this movement elevated the landscape to a subject worthy of painting. Born on Staten Island in 1823, Cropsey trained in mechanical drafting, but began doing trips to the Catskills and the White Mountains around 1841. His success, especially in brilliantly colored autumn landscapes, ranks him among the top half-dozen artists of the Hudson River School. This piece captures a bit of the autumn colors he became known for. The beloved American landscape is now seen as domesticated by civilization, with the figures talking and the cow seen next to the lake's edge. It is man and nature coexisting peacefully. Among his activities in drafting was the design of the Victorian-style 6th Avenue elevated station in New York. In direct contrast to the previous piece, when I acquired this very large 30 by 40 inch work in the early 1980s, this upstate New York artist was virtually unknown. His dates and even the spelling of his name, Henry Boise, were in dispute. Nevertheless, it is a minor masterpiece and beautifully illustrated the gradual introduction of man's permanent presence, symbolized by the cows at the water's edge and the tiny sailboat way off in the distance. The beauty and drama of the rural landscape still dominate the image. Boise died young, at age 40, and over the decades, scholarship has revealed much about the artist. 50 works have come to auction, and a handful of his works are now in museums. In the case of the artist Louis Remy Mignot, accidents of birth, events of history, and choices made seem to have snatched away an almost certain reputation as one of our country's most acclaimed artists of the Hudson River era. Mignot was born in Charleston, South Carolina, of French parents. At 17, he departed for studies in Holland for almost 5 years, returning to America in 1852 and settling in New York. He rapidly became acknowledged as a major landscape artist of the period, became elected to the important organizations of the day, and even accompanied the legendary Frederick Church on an extended trip through Ecuador and Panama in 1857. Mignot quickly became recognized for both his classic Hudson River paintings like this autumn piece, which was painted in 1859, and exotic scenes of tropical landscapes. And yet, a number of inescapable facts colored his life. He was Southern-born, living in the North. He was a Catholic, living in a Protestant land. He had been an American, living in Europe. He was the only Southern-born artist among the popular Hudson River painters. The years leading up to the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 saw increasing anti-Confederacy sentiment in New York, which deeply affected Mignot, with his own conflicted loyalties. In 1862, with his career still on the ascendancy in America, he left with his family and moved to London. He began to reestablish his career, exhibited throughout Europe, and was known to have painted with the great J.M. Whistler. It seemed he escaped his demons. He frequently traveled to the continent, especially Paris, where he found himself tragically trapped at the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. Exact details are shrouded in mystery, but it seems he was captured during the siege of Paris, imprisoned, and by the time of his release, contracted smallpox and died at the age of 39. By the time of his passing, his career in Europe was widely accepted and future success seemed assured. But again, bigger events interfered. It's tragically ironic that Louis Remy Mignot died in a European conflict rather than the conflict that engulfed his place of birth. Born outside of Pittsburgh in 1822, William Sonntag moved to Cincinnati in the early 1840s. Many artists of German descent resided in Cincinnati. Working outside of the traditional regions of the New York-based landscape artists of the 1840s and 50s, Sonntag made regular painting trips around the Ohio River Valley and into the mountains of West Virginia, where this was painted in 1859. During his early exhibition of his work in Cincinnati, Sonntag met the director of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, who commissioned him to travel and paint the scenery as the rail line crossed the Alleghenies. Perhaps the artist's early separation from the New York-based artists contributed to his developing his own unique style, which is instantly recognized today. After travels in Europe, Sonntag settled in New York City in the early 1860s and became well integrated among the leading Hudson River artists of the day. Unquestionably, landscape painting dominated the earlier Hudson River artists' work. However, marine or coastal painting became the second most popular subject. At this time, most Americans, including the artists, lived fairly close to the Atlantic shore. For artists, capturing the constant movement of ocean waters with its own unique challenge, and soon artists were painting marine scenes from Maine to Maryland. William Hart immigrated from Scotland at 4 years old along with his brother James and sister Julia. Both became prominent artists of the period. Raised in Albany, he eventually settled in New York City around 1854 and quickly became established as a leading landscape artist in the Luminous tradition. Hart also explored seascape paintings, especially in Maine. This work is entitled Passing Storm and is dated 1864. Here, the artist depicts a quiet, almost docile ocean in sharp contrast to the gray, ominous clouds. He bathed the foreground in sharp sunlight while creating two separate moods. Some years after I acquired this piece, I received a letter from the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, stating that they had a larger but identical version of this work, and dated 2 years later. They wanted to know if mine was a study for theirs. I replied, no, yours is a copy of mine. Funny, I never heard from them again. Dutch-born and European-trained Maurice de Haas was a devoted marine painter. He brought with him a distinctly Dutch view of the ocean, painted in the generally cool tones of his teachers. De Haas saw the ocean as an agitating, frothy, constantly threatening adversary to man. Many of his works depict the ocean as an all-powerful, where she defeats all and any who dare travel on her. Admiral David Farragut was aware of de Haas's reputation and invited him to paint images of major sea battles of the Civil War, like this scene here, the Battle of Mobile Bay, and Farragut's famous quote, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." This piece depicts a square rigger flying the American flag, a sailboat, and a rowboat with several figures aboard, and a steam vessel off on the horizon, seemingly everything that floats. Distinctive coastal watchtower is painted in sharp detail, and off in the very far distance are several structures that are likely a sizable coastal town. Amid these buildings, and you probably can't see it, is in fact a windmill, which were found on Long Island, where I believe this picture was painted. Some artists establish a vaunted reputation while still alive. Others take much longer. For Francis Silva, it took a century. Silva's career was delayed by service in the Civil War, as seen here, a captain in the 1st Infantry New York Volunteers. For an artist, getting his work exhibited at the National Academy of Design is considered the official start of his career. Silva's first piece exhibited at the Academy did not occur until he was 34 years old in 1869. He died in 1886, meaning his career as an artist lasted only 17 years, significantly less than any of the prominent marine artists of his day. His work was considered remarkable, light-filled, luminous scenes executed with exceptional drawing skills. Yet his name and work virtually disappeared. The first minor reference to Francis Silva in modern times was in an exhibition catalog in 1980, almost a century after his passing. And then in 2008, a major work sold at auction, reputedly to Bill Gates, for $2.8 million. Well, things changed quickly. He became a major figure. This piece reflects a popular theme of its day, a shipwreck washed ashore, painted in 1878. Most scholars attribute the shipwreck symbolism as a reflection of the aftermath of the Civil War and its long-term impact on the American people. These events are all the more remarkable considering that Francis Silva was totally self-taught. The term genre painting refers to paintings of ordinary life. Prior to the mid-19th century, the classical attitude prevailed that man should be portrayed at his loftiest on a heroic scale. With the rise of democracy and the fall of aristocracy came the growth of the common man's philosophy and an economically improved middle class. Increasingly, these people wanted art that reflected their life, often rural scenes of people earning their livelihood, but also, as seen here, capturing a tense moment in everyday life. The artist, Charles Blauvelt, was New York born and active throughout the city, painting this poignant scene in 1889. The basket of apples and the meat at the table add a little bit to the scene. The grocer appears to be carefully examining paper money, script of some sort, or perhaps an IOU statement. But it's clear his approval is critical to the mother. Blauvelt was known for his sympathetic depictions of immigrant families and their uncertain circumstances in this country. Well regarded, he achieved National Academy status, became an instructor at the Naval Academy from 1869 to 1878, and passed away at 76 years old in Greenwich, Connecticut. The cataclysmic effects of the Civil War conjure images of its causes, its devastating effects, and the key figures in its execution. All of these captured in the early days of photography. Much of the art appearing after the Civil War was somber and melancholy, reflecting the attitudes of the still divided country. This extraordinary image of a black man was painted in 1879 by English-born J.G. Brown. It captures both the mood of the country and the plight of the blacks at that time. Brown's skill as an artist was exceptional. During his lifetime, he was probably the richest painter in the country, earning an estimated $1 million. A bit of a blot on his reputation, he developed a theme that he repeated over and over again of the often homeless street urchins of the city, smiling, happy, industrious, self-reliant kids, often depicted shining shoes. Brown became known as the bootblack Raphael. He captured the popular Horatio Alger stories of the day that appealed to the Victorian tastes, and the wealthy robber barons were his biggest clients. However, this is closer to reality. Street kids sleeping in a stairwell. Brown's more serious works like this rank him up with names like Winslow Homer and Eastman Johnson. When I acquired this piece, the title was Hard Times. Some years later, I found documentation of its original title, Hard Times Massa, Political Correctness in Action. Thomas Waterman Wood was an extraordinary artist and a keen observer of the common man. Born in Montpelier, Vermont, he developed a special interest in depicting mid-19th century rural life and how people earned their living. Here, Wood is depicting a popcorn vendor preparing to salt a bag of popcorn. Wood was known for accuracy, reality, and not sugarcoating his subjects. In addition to the exquisite detail of the straw hat and his sensitive expression, a closer look reveals the figure is partially crippled, with a shortened leg that is being supported in a makeshift crutch with his cane hooked over the basket of popcorn. This piece was painted in 1880 and is a watercolor that achieves the depth of an oil. A great deal of scholarship has documented Thomas Waterman Wood's life and his career, culminating in a museum of his work in his hometown of Montpelier, Vermont. Now, what you are looking at here is the oldest known still life, painted in 1500 BC in ancient Egypt on the wall of the tomb of Mignot, a highly placed government official. It represents food, household utensils, and items the deceased carries into the afterlife. In more modern times, the ultimate objective of a still life is to look real as the subjects being painted. That is how the artist who painted it will be judged. In spite of the great skill required to paint this subject, the importance of still life painting was determined in the 19th century when the French academies taught the doctrine of hierarchy of genre, or subject matter, stating a painting's artistic merit was greatly judged by the subject being painted. Historical, biblical, and mythological themes were highly placed, while still life, well, that was at the bottom. So too, as 19th century American paintings developed, still life art had taken it less seriously than landscape, marine, or genre work. The artist John Henry Way became Baltimore's premier painter. Interestingly, Baltimore throughout the 1860s was among the wealthiest cities in the country and had several wealthy, dedicated collectors who actively supported the city's artists, paying high prices, encouraging them to remain there even throughout the Civil War. Way's exhibitions and achievements were regularly reported in the newspapers, and he was dubbed, quote, the city's treasure. He was acknowledged as Baltimore's finest artist and the South's finest still life painter. His paintings of hanging grapes were so real, the viewer could tell what variety they were. When a full pineapple is present, it's a symbol of welcome, friendship, and hospitality. And when displayed at social events, it meant no expense was spared and the guests would enjoy themselves. John F. Francis played a pivotal role in rejuvenating still life paintings and elevating it back to being a respected subject matter. He was an itinerant portrait painter throughout Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Tennessee, until returning to Philadelphia around 1840. Gradually, his focus changed until he was a totally dedicated still life artist by 1850, and he remained so with the last known and dated still life of his, 1879. Francis favored food and often fruit for his subject. His compositions were usually sumptuous, an abundance of richly adorned food, china, and wine on a formal white tablecloth. He became known for his, quote, luncheon and dessert paintings. Francis broke away from the previous stern and austere compositions set on simple plank surfaces. Sadly, the loss of his wife and 2 children contributed to increasing reclusiveness, depression, and a significant, if not complete, reduction in his paintings. Although wealthy at the time of his passing, he was all but forgotten as an artist. Still life painters were prone to experimenting with different ways to depict the subject matter the public desired. George Cochran Lambdin lived in Philadelphia all his life. His earlier works depicted sentimental genre scenes and poignant images of the Civil War. His still life focus on floral images started around 1860. In addition to classical tabletop paintings of floral arrangements in vases, he innovated a new approach, likely prompted by a spectacular flower gardens at his home. He depicted flowers, often roses, in natural settings, growing against stone walls that surrounded his garden. You can see a simple suggestion here of the wall behind the flowers, which are painted in various stages of growth from buds to full bloom. These scenes became quite popular, resulting in large numbers of chromolithographic prints, which sold widely and helped Lambdin earn full National Academy recognition. The American public's desire for what's real, as well as its increased exposure to inexpensive art prints, helped still life subject matter increase in popularity throughout the latter part of the 19th century and become eventually an accepted part of the Hudson River School. Our next segment, The Big Bang. Impressionism changes painting forever.